In a number of locations, this philosophy continues to the present day. The evolution of the modern concept of protected areas is generally regarded as having started in the state of Georgia, which boasted a reserve for public use as early as 1825. However, there is some evidence which traces the history of parks to a state reservation in Massachusetts in 1741. Parks conservation began in earnest, however, on 30 June 1874 when President Abraham Lincoln signed a law granting to Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias to California to be held for public use, resort, and recreation, inalienable for all time. A short time after this, on 1 March 1872, Yellowstone was declared as a national park, widely accepted as the first national park in the world. In the North America, protected area systems are large and complex. Policy and legislation for the conservation of protected area is found at both state and federal level, whilst within states, a number of cities have been protected at the local and regional levels. National parks and other categories of lands within the national parks system are established by individual act of Congress. The National Park Service was established by the Act of 1970. The National Park Service has responsibility for three broad types of areas: natural, historical, and recreational, represented by some 60 categories of nomenclature under the National Park System. These include National Park, National Monument, National Reserve, National Preserve, National Recreation Area, National Historic Site, National Historic Park, National Battlefield, National Seashore, National Lakeshore, National Scenic Trail, National River, as well as National Wild and Scenic River. Detailed definitions for these different categories are not provided under general legislation, and restrictions and regulations vary considerably between sites of the same category. Protected areas in Europe and Italy, following the example of the United States. The first European parks were created in Sweden in 1909. The first Alpine park was created in 1914 in Engadina in Switzerland. A few years later, the first Polish natural park was made at Bialowieza. In Italy, the first parliamentary discussion on the issue of nature conservation can be seen in the action of two deputies, Luigi Rama and Giovanni Rosati, who presented a bill for the preservation of the natural Ravenna landscape in 1905. In 1920, King Vittorio Emanuele III himself donated 2,100 hectares of his hunting ground to Italy in order to create a national park. In 1922, on this land was established as National Park of Gran Paradiso. Later on, in few years, since 1923, the National Park of Abruzzo, the National Park of Circeo, and the National Park of Stelvio were born. The park was created only to protect a natural landscape. During the following years, this first was enriched by other goals, such as scientific research, biodiversity, defense of cultural tradition. Today, Italy claims 24 national parks.
European protected areas are divided into national parks, natural and regional parks, nature reserve, reserve and forestry parks, biospheres reserves and marine parks. To these typologies, we can add many others that sometimes make difficult the comparison among the states. For example, natural monuments, clamp zones, singular trees, natural enclave, faunal reserves, place of natural interest, paleontological place, fauna's shelters, ecological and biodiversity corridors, zones of scientific interest, fluvial reserves, protected natural space, rural parks. The Spain, for example, group among almost to the categories summoned before for a total of 700 protected natural places and more. Tourism in the protected areas can develop, but it has to respect an equilibrium that guarantee an economical and social development, and at the same time environment's preservation and fruition. For work in a correct way in this direction, Europe has obtained the Bearable Tourism European Card in the protected areas. It shapes to the principles enunciated from the Bearable Tourism Global Card, elaborated in Lanzarote in 1995. The card is a practical instrument for the realization of tourism corresponding to the bearable developments in the protected areas, therefore being the seniors to realize tourist activity that respects and preserve in a long period the natural, cultural and social reserves and contributes in a fair and positive way to the economic development and to the full realization of the people who live, work and stay in the protected areas.